Anthony Albanese's first visit as Australian Prime Minister to India will undoubtedly be a memorable one. After all, which diplomatic visit includes a cricket match, a lap around the stadium in a chariot, a Holi program, and a visit to an aircraft carrier? While all the colour and fanfare from the meetings between Albanese and Modi have been dominating headlines, the message is even more important. And it's for the dragon in the room. Today on the show, we're going to look at how India-Australia's relationship has deepened over the last few years and why it's at a crucial turning point. Also why Mr. Albanese has his task cut out for him. But before we get into that conversation, let's listen in to what Anthony Albanese said today.
Is a top-tier security partner. The Indian Ocean is central to both countries' security and our prosperity. And there has never been a point in both of our countries' histories where we've had such a strong strategic alignment, which has been reinforced by my current visit to India and will be reinforced further by Prime Minister Modi's attendance at the Quad Leaders meeting in a short period of time.
Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador and representative of India at the WTO, with me on the show. Suresh Goel, former ambassador, with me today, as is Maroof, Raza, consultant and strategic affairs expert. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Ambassador Dasgupta. Why is the Indian-Australian relationship on sort of turbo speed? We've always been friends, but slightly indifferent friends, if I may put it in very simplistic terms. So no animosity there, but no real, close cooperation. Has it all changed because of Quad? And where do we stand now in a post-COVID world where everyone is looking for an alternative to China?
I think you have to look back a little bit to see when the last Prime Minister had visited Australia. It was way back in 1986. And after that, Prime Minister Modi visited Australia in 2014. There have been 10 ministerial visits from Indian ministers in 2022 alone. So India, I think, has realized that it needs to deepen its relationship and broaden its relationship with Australia. It's a very valuable partner. And this has come about, of course, with the rise of China in the background. But even otherwise, we have realized Australia's importance. And the other point is that the coming years are going to be ones which will be fraught with various kinds of conflicts, including of resources. And as far as energy is concerned, minerals are concerned, Australia is a storehouse of minerals. So India would be requiring these resources from Australia, and Australia would benefit from entry into a market of, as they keep saying, 1.5 billion people. Mm-hmm. So it is a complementarity of relationships, and this has reached, I think, a kind of a peak in the last year or so after the signing of the ACTA.
Yeah.
China has indeed played an important role by its very aggressive expansionist designs and by taking various overt actions against both India and Australia.
Right. Why are we talking about China? Because China recently increased its budget by 7%, but it's a massive, massive increase in absolute terms. The Quad is definitely got its eye on it. And, that's why interesting to see those pictures of Anthony Albanese on the INS Vikrant today, first foreign leader to visit this indigenous aircraft carrier. Maroof, Raza, let me come to you on the defense part of the whole piece. We know ACTA is in place. We know it's a placeholder. ACTA is a placeholder. The big, agreement still has to come. But I'll keep trade to one side. Talk to us about the defense part and why Australia and India are talking more and more to each other on this.
Well, Australia-India relations, as Ambassador Dasgupta has brought out have really gone to a very high level in the last couple of years. The reasons are as follows. And as has been also brought out, that you see, China has been instrumental in getting us together. Your enemy's enemy is somebody that leads you to create bonds of friendship. So Australia had been cornered by China quite strongly after it stood up to the China in the pandemic times, as well as the fact that Chinese investments had been huge in Australia, but the threats from China were not taken very kindly by Australia because Australia is a powerful economy, it's very self-sufficient, and as has been brought out, it's very high on natural resources, including uranium, which if I know correctly, is what we need for our nuclear programs. Now, where does the visit to the aircraft carrier come in and what is the significance of that? One is India's own indigenous capabilities and flouting that. The second, of course, is the fact that we are all members of Quad, India, Australia, Japan, US, and therefore India is exhibiting that it's more and more getting engaged with the Indian Ocean region. As somebody would say that we are prepared for 2.5 wars. One is with Pakistan, one is with China on the Himalayas, and half a war to start with, at least in the high seas of the Indian Ocean region. And there the aircraft carrier is significant. In fact, as far as I know, Australia doesn't have an aircraft carrier group. Aircraft carriers don't operate on their own. They operate like monarchs of the sea with anything from 30 to 50 ships, submarines, and a whole lot of other items that go with them. So it's a very, very large flotilla. And India has always had an aircraft carrier group, at least from the 60s. Now we have two, and we will be manufacturing another one of our own. The other point that we need to convey to Australia is that, we are well prepared to make our commitment on the ground and in the high seas for our part of the defense takeaway. Yes, China has increased its defense budget, but please remember, China has borders with 14 countries and problems with many more than 14 countries. So China has to make investments to take care of all its ambitions all around in Asia. Whereas we are very clear, we are a status quo country. We do not want to expand our territories unnecessarily and get into conflicts. China is thinking exactly the obverse of India. And finally, and most important, is the fact that Australia has gone in for a nuclear submarine program with the Americans and the Brits called the AUKUS program. Now, at least as an Indian, I felt peeved. Why couldn't we have been co-opted into that? Is it a white man's grouping against the rest of the world, China notwithstanding? Or is it because we are technologically not up to speed? Anyway, our good friends, the Russians, have given us one nuclear submarine already on lease. And that's a euphemism for you can use it as you want. And we are likely to be getting two more into operational service other than our own nuclear submarine program. So we are pretty much prepared to take on our responsibilities, and trade, I think, will dominate the better part of our relations, not the military aspect. Back to you.
Okay. So military aspect may not be front and center. Trade definitely is. One big headline coming out, which everyone's excited about, is, Indian degrees being acceptable in Australia and vice versa. We have to see the details on to what extent and which kind of degrees. Those in the medical field, for example, always have, a H, medical law. But Ambassador Goel, with 10 lakh people of Indian origin in Australia, Indian students in Australia being the second largest cohort, there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake. And yes, they will come and open one university, perhaps a second one in Gift City. But are we getting the full leverage of what we mean to the Australian economy in just terms of skilled immigration, in terms of students?
Tamanna, there are lots of mixed signals that we are actually getting in this visit here. Oh. Now, what is the visit all about? Is Australia a trade partner, a strategic partner? What actually are we seeking from Australia? You mentioned education. The number of students in Australia had begun to grow even before Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister. It's simply because they found that the education in Australia was cheaper than even in India, and they hope to really use that as a launching pad for immigration into Australia. Australia opening campuses here, obviously they want to promote their education system in here. Recognition of Indian degrees in Australia, yes, medical degrees recognized there. That's a plus point. But most of the medical graduates, when they want to practice, what are the target countries? I'm mentioning all this that because whatever we are talking about, whether it is ACTA, trade cooperation, education, etc., there are all things where the contours are not very clear. To my mind, and I can be very, very honest about this really, the visit is all about really further reinforcing the strategic partnership in the context of Quad in Indo-Pacific and what you mentioned about the dragon in the China shop. That is what it is all about. We want to basically further strengthen, reinforce our ties, our working functioning against one single common target, China, and the rest of it is all cherry on the top. The two main issues that I see really with Australia are, as Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta said, resources, and Maroof supported that, and uranium. I wonder what happened to the uranium deal with Australia. I mean, are we still talking about the nuclear cooperation with Australia, supply of resources, or are we talking about coal? We are increasing our sourcing of coal from Australia, high quality coal. On the other hand, we have a net zero target in 2070. How are we reconciling it? Or more I think about it, more it is really about China. And there is a great deal of hesitation there again from what I see. We do not want to go all the way out.
Ambassador Goel, it's great that you've put it into perspective and you've spoken so clearly, but what about China? Is it going to be a defense cooperation? Are we going to be an alternative to China to some extent for Australia? Because that relationship went south pretty fast. So,
Absolutely.
Where are those spheres of cooperation?
Very briefly, Tamanna, if I could say, Minister Jaishankar at one time used the word that we should not let the hesitations of the history turn into, what does the history turn into hesitation? The problem is that we are not very sure about how to deal with China in Indo-Pacific. And therefore, when you talk about security alliance, I think it was Maroof who mentioned that I wish you were part of AUKUS. No. If anything is holding Quad back from a security alliance, it's basically because of our position on China. We do not, Minister Jaishankar recently mentioned, we can, do you want me to take over a more powerful economy? We are still not sure which way do we want to go, whether we think that our being in Quad will make China relent in relationship with India or which way. I think what we want is, we want to have a balance in relationship with China and relationship with the West. I don't think that is achievable anymore.
That's a bit of a reset beyond, a lot of posturing that happens one way or the other. That's an interesting reset and way to look at it. Ambassador Dasgupta, on the trade part of it, ACTA is important. It's a landmark. It's one of the first, major trade agreements that we have signed with a large Western nation. But there is more to come. Right, there is more that we have been hoping for. There's a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement which has been stuck since 2011. Explain to us what the difference between the two is, and is ACTA as meaningful as it should be in terms of the potential of India and Australia's trade deals?
The ACTA is the first step in the deepening of trade relationships. It is an FTA, and the comprehensive economic cooperation agreement will not only deal with trade, it will deal with investment, it will deal with a host of other areas which are increasingly getting into the international trade scenario. things like digital technology and access, privacy of data, and so on and so forth. So there would be, of course, issues about sustainable development, to which India is also very deeply committed. So all these issues will figure in the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, and it would use the ECTA as the building block. So this is to start with. And then the other announcements which have taken place, for instance, the mutual recognition of qualifications, the extension by 2 years of post-work visas, post-study work visas. That is the kind of thing which will also be incorporated, I presume, in the comprehensive agreement. So this would really deepen the relationship. And I agree with Mr. Maroof, Raza, and to a certain extent with Ambassador Suresh Goel. The perceived threat from China and its expansionist designs, that has acted as a catalyst. But on the economic front and trade front, I think there is a lot of potential which has not been tapped yet, has not been exploited fully. And so there we have broadened our engagement from the Quad to the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative to the ECTA, and from there we take it forward to have the Comprehensive Partnership Agreement. So it is going to be a multi-pronged kind of a multifaceted relationship with Australia. And the deeper it is, the deeper would be our common front, which we put up against China and for peace in the Indo-Pacific.
Right. Maroof, do you agree with that assessment that the Indian-Australian relationship is still very much in the broader context of the Quad?
No, I don't think it's just Quad-centric. There is a bilateral element to India's relationship with Australia, which goes beyond Quad. In fact, it'd be quite interesting for us to introspect and understand that is Quad all about one for all and all for one? Or does Quad give you the flexibility to build a bilateral relationship as long as you can all enter the same room from time to time during Quad summits and shake each other's hands? Unlike what happened in the G20 when the G20 leaders met, I mean, there were 18 on one side and China and Russia on the other side. And quite clearly, there was a huge division of strategic purposes. So Quad is a grouping which I feel, and there are people who disagree with me, but I think I might just be proved right in the long run, that Quad will only come into its own if it spells out that its primary binding adhesive is the anti-China card. Otherwise, there's no reason for these four countries to engage in a grouping when India, for example...
That's the one, thing that they don't want to say. They don't want to make that admission.
See, the point is, I think we have two diplomats on the show and I'm outnumbered, but I still fight to the finish. And the point is that I think we are too mesmerized by diplomatic politeness that we don't want to say on the face. But, China is one country which is rewriting a lot of rules. And one of the things China does, it says on the face that it means business. It's not been in a state of denial whether it's going to do a cyber attack on anybody, or it's not been in a state of denial that it's going to occupy more territories in the South China Sea, or it's not been in a state of denial about, this whole nonsense about bulletless border management that for so long our diplomats had led us to believe till it went up in the air with one fist fight in Galwan. So let's get a little straight about this, that India-Australia relationship has a lot of bilateral content. For example, and this is a point I wanted to emphasize from the very beginning, India has massive demographic dividends. India has a massive manpower pool that, though unfortunately 3/4 of India's graduates are unemployable, but given the suitable training, they can become employable and become part of the manpower pool that Australia needs. Remember, there was an adage that did the rounds at least a few years ago that India produced in Australia every year. So we've got a lot of manpower, and that manpower needs money, funding, opportunities, and what have you. And Australia has got a lot of land, money, and mineral wealth where we can work together. And the second thing, it was brought out briefly about coal. But apart from coal that Australia has, please remember, Australia has also got a large resource of shale oil. Shale oil, as some of us would know, is easier to excavate and is a good substitute for oil and gas, considering the fact that even the G20 summit was recently deliberating about what are the alternatives when oil and gas runs out. And current projections are that oil and gas, as we have it today, will run out in 60
All
to
of the
80 years.
communication before this visit is focusing on green energy. That's the new realm of cooperation.
So exactly, you hit the nail on the head. But let me tell you, there is a very interesting book, Tamanna. Maybe someday I'll gift you one. It's called The Third Curve. And that book talks about the fact that the world's energy resources that we have today came into being after 150 billion years of fossil fuel growth and accumulation at the bottom of the earth. We've already blown up half of that in 70 to 80 years. Now, we don't have 150 billion years to make that kind of quantities again. So either we find alternatives, or we go in and go a little easy on blowing up our energy.
Right.
Or the third thing is green, wind, sun energy, all that. But all that, interestingly, you still need oil to operate the batteries that run the wind farms.
Right. We've learned that hard lesson, especially after the Ukraine-Russia war, where people have been rediscovering coal and no longer treating it as such a dirty fuel. Maroof, Neki or Puch Puch, I'm looking forward to receiving that book. But for now, I will wrap it here. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. We'll take a very short break, but a lot more coming up on the other side. Stay tuned.